to drive your career, not just ride along? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm Simone E. Morris, your host and career strategist, here to give you the roadmap. Each week, we're cutting through the noise with strategies, stories, and insights to get you back in control. Your career clarity starts right here. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm delighted to have joining us today is Dr. Ann Welsh. She is a psychologist, an executive coach, and consultant who is passionate about empowering women leaders and supporting working parents. With a background at Harvard and a wealth of practical experience, Dr. Welsh is here to share her expertise. And welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. Balance, integration is a thing in the workplace. So it's a hot topic and I want to hear all about it. But first, I want to know a bit more about you. I gave the intro, but you tell me about what you're currently doing.
Yeah, my my career path has been kind of circuitous, but at this moment in time, I think of my career as like it's like a bicycle wheel with at the hub is supporting working parents and working moms really in particular, and the spokes are all sorts of different pieces. So I have a small private therapy practice that's entirely focused on maternal mental health. I have an executive coaching practice that's supporting women in leadership. I have a group coaching program for working moms. And then I also do some consulting with companies who want to improve their working parent support or bring in kind of sponsored parental leave coaching or other kinds of tools that they can use for working parents.
That sounds all by design. And I'm wondering, because this show is all about being in the driver's seat, being intentional with your career, and with all those different buckets that you just mentioned, how did you get to the place of designing it, let me say, on your terms?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it wasn't, it was piecemeal. It was one thing at a time. And it was a little bit of personal and professional blending. So I started out like gung ho for a career in medicine. I wanted to be a doctor. My parents joke that I like emerged from the womb with a stethoscope. Like that was the
Nice.
only thing I was going to
Got a
be.
visual there.
Yeah. And I did everything I needed to do and got into medical school. And it was only then where I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm not excited about this. I don't actually know that I want to do this. And that was the first moment where I kind of, in hindsight, took a little more control of my career and said, I recognize that everybody is looking at me thinking I'm absolutely crazy right now. And I also know in my gut that this is not the right thing for me. And I'm going to walk away before I get any farther down this path. And it was scary. And part of what enabled me to do that is some degree of confidence that like I did it once, I can do it again. It was like, if I'm walking away from medicine, but I got into medical school, turns out I'm wrong and this is not a great idea, I can always come back and do it again. Like, yes, it was hard, but I did it once. And really the rest of my career has been a similar process of finding out what everybody else is expecting of me and trying to tune into what I want for myself and how that's going to fit with the rest of my life in this moment. And so I made a leap I was at Harvard, I was working full time, I had my second child, and it wasn't working for our family for me to have that particular job, my husband to have the job he did, and to be growing our family. And so I left and I formed my own practice. And that was only one piece. That was the therapy practice. And everything else has kind of grown out of that. I've expanded as my kids have gotten older and a little more self-sufficient. And a lot of the work that I do now is inspired by the clients I've had up to this point, right? And recognizing that I love therapy and it makes a lot of progress for individuals, but there's also these other kind of systemic pieces that are going on, and I want to be able to make change there too. It's been intentional in that I've chosen each step, but it wasn't a map I drew for myself at any point along the way.
You said a lot of great insights that I want to go back to. The first thing I want to go back to is you talking about leaping and quieting the noise and really being centered on your own voice and your own, beacon of where you want to go in your career. Talk to us a little bit more about that, and because I know there are people who are deciding what they want to do as the next chapter in their career. And there is that inner critic, there is that noise from others around you. Talk to us about how you were able to hone in on your voice, trust your voice, and move forward in your career.
Yeah, I mean, with that first sleep, sometimes I look back and I'm not sure how I got the chutzpah to do it, right? Like I look back and I say, wow, that was really brave. But I think for me, there was this sense of really, again, getting quiet and really thinking through what's that whisper internally, right? I think sometimes people talk about gut feelings as being this big pull that they can't quiet. For me, sometimes it's like a little very quiet voice in the background, and I have to make space for it. I do this work a lot with my clients as well of I tell them it's kind of like cleaning out your closet, right? You have to take out everything and put it on the bed and label it all. Where's that expectation coming from? That one's from social media. That one's my mom. That one's my professor. That one's my Aunt Susan who said this thing about me when I was 5, right? Like you've got to label all of these pieces. And then once they're on the bed and you see them and you label them, you get to decide, what am I picking back up? Right. And so, in that decision to walk away from medicine, it was like, okay, this was something I was kind of interested in. I liked science. I liked helping people. I had 2 parents as doctors, so or I had 2 doctors as parents. There was a lot of expectation there. And it was like, okay, I like these things, but what I really like, what I'm really interested in is people, right? I'm very curious about people and why they make the decisions they do and how they think. And I kind of want to get in their heads. And that's not what I'm going to be studying if I go to medical school. So let me try this other thing. Um,
Mm.
and it's never, yeah, occasionally I'll have clients that have big ahas, right? I was working with a client recently who really quickly got in touch with a much younger part of herself that had wanted to go into a career in like social work and made a big pivot. And it was all crystal clear for her as soon as I kind of asked the question, what did you used to want to do? Right. But for a lot of us, it's not that clear. It is this little whispers, these little tiny breadcrumbs that we kind of follow through our lives and through our careers to make those decisions that are getting us closer and closer to alignment.
Mhm. So you talked about having parents as doctors or doctors as parents. I'm doing the same thing. And so I wonder, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, so that was I wanted to be a doctor. Well, I wanted to be 2 things. I wanted to be a doctor or like a pop singer. And that's not the most logical career choice. Um, but I think in particular because I had a mother that was a doctor, and that was not a thing in the 80s when I was growing up. Very few of my friends had working mothers. Even fewer had physician mothers. So it's what I saw modeled, and I thought it was really cool that she was a doctor. And again, I think it did line up with my own interest in science and wanting to be a helper in some capacity. Um, but in the end, I think it was a lot of, I came from a family of academics, and that's kind of was what was in my brain. Like that was what I saw as the options. And it wasn't until I got into college and kind of started to see, wow, there's a whole number of other careers out there that I could choose from. And that still happens to me today, where I'm like, oh, I could do this thing. Let me see what that feels like. Let me try it, treat it like an experiment, see how I react, and then choose if I really want to fold this in as a piece of my career. In some sort of ongoing capacity.
Mm. If you had to come up with a title to, define your career body of work, what would it be?
I at this point, I would say a working mom guide, right? I'm not a guru, but I have a lot of knowledge, right? Even my grad school research before I became a parent, unknowing what I was going into, was in the transition to motherhood and was in career decision making. These were pieces I've been dealing with and working with and researching long before I was even doing them on my own or before I was helping clients navigating them, because I find that these are questions of identity. And that's fascinating to me from all sorts of angles.
Mhm. Talk to me a little bit more about identity. I am a mom as well, so talk about that. My brain went to a place of sort of losing your identity somewhat when you have children, and you've got four, I believe.
Yes.
So, I'm curious how you balance it all and what you meant when you talked about identity and careers.
Yeah. Well, broad brushstrokes, identity is how we see ourselves, and what that is defined by all sorts of pieces. I kind of talk about identity as a pie chart, right? And we might have 300 things in there. What happens when we become moms, and I want to speak to that sense of losing yourself, because that's a really, really common thing, is that we have to fit this giant new piece into that pie, right? I mean, motherhood is a huge piece of identity, and it comes with a whole bunch of those expectations we were talking about earlier from outside, right? Everyone has an opinion on how to be a good mom. And they will not shy away from telling you from the moment that you are pregnant, and they're commenting on how your belly bump is looking, to comments on screen time or whether or not your child's wearing a coat or whatever. So you have this huge, huge piece. And what people end up doing sometimes, because it's almost impossible to do anything else, is that just covers over everything, right? It's like that becomes the entire pie. And we lose sight of those other pieces. They're not gone, they're just hidden. And the work that I love to do is to help make that piece fit inside the pie with everything else, right? And it's not so much about shrinking its importance, it's about acknowledging that those other things are in there, so that motherhood is a piece of who you are, a really important, vital, creative, wonderful piece. And there are other pieces of you outside of that, and they may be affected by motherhood. There's nothing wrong with that, but they do exist. And that's the kind of identity formation process that doesn't just happen the minute you have a baby. That is over the course of being a parent, which is really a whole lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to read something that I got a quote from you and have you elaborate just a little bit because it seems apropos at this time to bring it up. You say motherhood doesn't shrink a woman's ambition, it reshapes it. Too often we view career success as a straight climb up the corporate ladder, but for many mothers, ambition expands outward, weaving a web of leadership, resilience, and purpose. It's time we stop asking women to choose between success and family and start recognizing the strengths they bring to both. Thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts, a whole book's worth that I'm writing, currently in the process of writing. But I think we have this narrative that you become a mom and it's like where ambition goes to die, right? I mean, to some extent, that is the story. And or we maybe have a narrative of a mom like that's working, quote, too hard and is abandoning her children. And it's like those are the two choices we get. And the reality is all of mothers actually live somewhere in gray space between those two extremes, and that you can be a wonderful, loving mom and be incredibly ambitious in your career. And part of understanding that both and space is to recognize that ambition is not linear, right? When we think of when we traditionally think of the word ambition, we think of climbing that corporate ladder, right? It's kind of up or out. I always use a law firm as a great example for this, right? Because that's literally what you do. Either you got to the next year or you're kicked out. And if you're kicked out, that's a failure, right? You have nowhere to go but up to partner. Otherwise, you've somehow failed the system. I encourage people to think about ambition as a web. right? And if you think about a web, you can, if you have kids that go to the playground and they're the webs, they can literally climb in any different direction. They can go on either side of it. There's 360 degrees of ambition, right? So you can be ambitious for power or status or income. You can also be ambitious for time or space or connection or meaning or joy. Those are all things that we get to be ambitious for in our lives, and we get to change course and direction at various points as well, based on all of our own needs. And part of that parenthood journey might be that you change direction for a little bit. You add in a piece, but it doesn't mean you've become not ambitious. And in fact, what I found, the more and more women I talk to, is that motherhood has actually clarified ambitions. It's given them new ones. It's given them more motivation to go after things, right? That it's actually been kind of an ambition accelerator rather than the death knell of ambition for them.
Hmm. So much to think about there. What would you say about balancing your career ambitions with motherhood? So, you know, you're the pie that you talked about before, there's a lot of things in that pie, including motherhood. How do you balance that and still prioritize your career ambitions?
Yeah, I think everyone talks about work-life balance, and then we kind of try to replace it with work-life integration, and
That's
that is
right.
a better term, right?
Yes.
Because I think, work and life are overlapping, certainly in the way that technology allows. We're never away from work or our kids, as someone who will get texts from kids all through the day. But really, I think the shift we need to make is to recognize that none of this is static, right? These are all constantly moving pieces. And that means that what balance looks like in any given day or week is going to be different from another day or week. I kind of talk to people often about using like a frame of seasons, and a season could be a week or a month or an actual season. And recognizing that we're going to tip and move in different directions. Different pieces of those pie may actually shift and take up more or less space based on all sorts of circumstances. And that's what balance is in the end, right? If you're listening to this podcast and you're not driving your car, you can even experiment. Like if you stand on one foot, notice how much movement is actually happening, right? You might have some big tips and wobbles, but you also probably have little tiny micro movements in like your ankle and all the tendons around it, right? Balance is actually constant movement. It's not steady. It's not some sort of nirvana state we reach. And when we open ourselves up to that kind of constant shift and play, we become more resilient. We become more powerful, right? And we develop less shame, right? Because we can just accept the balance is tipped, quote, in this direction for now, and it will tip in a different direction at another point. And all of that is okay.
Yeah, you brought up shame, which made me think about how there are others who can shame parents in the workplace. And, we've been talking a lot about mothers, I'll say parents at large, shame them, and it can impact your career. Talk to us a little bit more about shame and navigating that and some strategies that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, I want to, speak to other people and kind of that shame we experience from others, because I think that is very real. There is a lot of bias around working parenthood,
Yeah.
and working mothers in particular, and assumptions that, well, they're leaving early for daycare pickup, or they are not as committed because of X, Y, or Z, or they're asking to work from home because their kid's sick again, or
Yep.
whatever. And then these kind of really negative stereotypes. And yet, what I tell people and companies is that working parents are bringing a ton of valuable skills to the table that we don't recognize enough, right? I joke that parenting is actually a masterclass in leadership, because you have to gain a million people skills. And in fact, your brain rewires to allow you to do that, birthing parent or not. There are massive brain changes when you bring a child into the home, and you are increasing empathy as part of that. those are those soft skills that we want all leaders to have, right? And so you parents get those just by nature of being a parent. They gain skills in processing, right? How quickly we take information in and make sense of it. You have to do that all the time as a parent. They gain skills in prioritizing, in being super efficient with their time, and they gain skills in project management and planning, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everything we do as parent is a project management skill. We have to keep the like nitty-gritty of our kids' safety at the same time as we're thinking about the big picture of raising a resilient, healthy child into adulthood. So there's all these things that parents are actually showing up with. And when we label that, and when parents recognize that too, it decreases their shame or any sense of embarrassment of like, oh, I have to call out sick again. They feel more empowered, but also the workplaces can use those and hone those skills together with the parent. Everybody wins in that situation.
I love how you were able to use those home skills or those, parenthood, motherhood skills and make them transferable. I was going to the place of resumes. I'm like, oh, this is really good for the resume and for LinkedIn as well, when we
Yeah.
think of assets for owning your career.
Yeah, yeah. And I do see that shifting a little bit. I mean, not a ton, but more and more people putting parenthood on their, at least on their LinkedIn profile. I don't look at a ton of resumes, but to kind of acknowledge like this is a thing that should be a selling feature, not a detriment in my
Yeah.
in my hiring.
Yeah, I agree. Have you come across any resources that would be helpful to share with our listeners just in terms of owning your career? And again, you can layer on top the motherhood layer. What resources, books, podcasts, articles, anything resource wise that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, one great one that came out earlier this year, especially this is more geared towards working mothers, but I think fathers could benefit from it too, is The Power Pause by Neha Ruch. And she really advocates that any sort of time you take for caregiving, whether that's a couple years when your kids are younger or a shorter amount of time, but that really thinking of that as a potential career accelerator, right? And helping you embrace that that is not walking away from career. It's really can be this strategic play that you make really along those same lines I was talking about of balancing of saying, okay, I'm going to lean into this one space for now, but that doesn't mean I can't lean back into career later. And she kind of beautifully walks you through some processes, especially for while you're in that pause of how to set up systems and to think about it in a way, again, that feels really empowering.
And are you thinking about your career with that pause and some intentionality, or you're taking, you're unplugging, or it's coming completely out of the environment and not thinking about that? And when you are wanting to come back, you start to think about that. How does that work?
I think it's in both and, right? Or an either or that, for some people that take caregiving pauses, there is every intention of going back. And, I've worked with a lot of clients who want to take some sort of pause and not always when their kids are little. I mean, sometimes it's a older kid has a need or an aging parent has a need and they're saying, I need to take some time off for that. And so we'll talk about what are those strategic things, right? How can you keep, even if it's not a foot in the door, how can you keep a toe in the door at your
Yep.
workplace? How can you stay active with your network so that you're still top of mind? Do you want to do some consulting or small projects? Like, what does it look like to kind of keep tabs on it? But sometimes it is, I am burnt out and I'm taking a pause for that reason, or I don't want to keep a foot in the door. I really just want to completely disengage from this part of my life for now. And how can I make that work with my current family and finances, etc. And then support on the other end eventually when they return of, okay, now I've been through this experience. Maybe it's changed me. Maybe it's shifted around some of those pie pieces. Maybe there's some new ones. Maybe I've removed some. Now, what am I going to do? How do I figure out what's next for me? How do I make those career decisions from this space? And that's also work that I really love doing. I think it's always exciting to be thinking about what do I want to do when I grow up, even if I am a grown up.
Yeah. Now that's a title of a book right there. I love that. But I want to, as we begin to wrap up this episode, I want to ask you, because this show is called The Power of Owning Your Career, what is your formula, Anne, for owning your career?
I think for me, it's approaching everything with curiosity and maybe even a little bit of a sense of play. Right? I think the thing that has allowed me to stay resilient and to experiment and try new things has been this ongoing frame of what if, right? What if I like this? What does this feel like? What would that be like? I am certainly a type A person and can be in the planning, live in a world of plans and
Yeah.
wanting things to go a certain way. And that works for some elements of my life. But in terms of career development, it can keep me a little bit constrained. And so when I keep this frame of playfulness and of not being wedded to the outcome, it's really allowed me so much more freedom to make those aligned choices, like I talked about with medical school very early on, and then kind of choices as my career grew and developed.
I love that. I loved not being aligned to the outcome because that can really cause unnecessary stressors as well.
Yeah.
Love the angle that you're talking about there. Well, it's certainly been such a pleasure to have you as a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Can you please tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you if they'd like to do so?
Yes, the easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn. It's just Dr. Ann Welsh, or my website, which is drannwelsh.com. I love getting messages and hearing about people that heard the podcast. And you can go on there to learn all about my group offerings and my one-on-one offerings. And I post updates sometimes as well about my book progress on ambitious working mothers. And I'm also on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, again, my sincere thanks from myself and from the listeners for having you as a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thank you.
So
This
much.
was so much fun. Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for today's empowering episode. I'm Simone E. Morris, and I want you to remember that you are indeed the architect of your career. Share this episode if it sparked something in you. Subscribe wherever you listen and find more resources at SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org. Keep practicing career ownership, and I'll be right here with you next week for more transformation.